Welcome to another episode of the Move, Talk, Thrive podcast. Today, we are going to look at negotiating and conversations where the stakes are high and emotions are running rampant. We get in these situations on a daily basis, whether it's with friends, colleagues, family, or external business associates. So it's really important that we can master ourselves in these really important conversations. We did have an episode in our first season, which was about conflict resolution, which had a pretty high ranking in terms of listeners. So we thought this is another good one to unpack. So let's get stuck in and look at how we can have really constructive conversations.
We are child development obsessed, business besties, and mums, and we're here to spill all our secrets.
We have a combined 30 years experience working with children, and each episode we will bring you up-to-date research and evidence-based strategies to set your children up to thrive.
I'm Lizzie Dawson, Australian exercise physiologist.
I'm Emily Mackey, Australian speech pathologist,
And this is the Move, Talk, Thrive podcast.
All right, Em, I feel like you're a master in this. I feel like you're really good at this.
I try. I try. I think conversations are a learnt skill. So after doing it for many years, you get better at it. Whatever you have to keep doing, you get better at. But I think it's still something that I have to work on. We all have to work on. And we all can learn how to have better conversations when, as you said, when the stakes are high. When we're feeling and so when the stakes are high, I think that means when we're a bit stressed, when we're feeling like we're having a conversation that's really important to us, when we're potentially being challenged on something or given feedback about something, or we're trying to negotiate something that is close to our hearts. I think that's what we mean when the stakes are high. Anyone can have a conversation with anyone when they don't care about it, what the conversation is or what they're thinking. I've got nothing to lose in this. So that's what we mean by having like that conversation that might feel stressful to you.
I think that's a really good point to remind ourselves of, is that when you are feeling a certain way in a conversation, and you'll start to, awareness is like so important, isn't it? Like how we respond in these situations. But I think that you just said, a little reminder, it's when we actually care. So we're having a conversation about something that we care about, and we shouldn't be fearful of that.
No,
I think.
But it can.
I mean, I am like, I feel like I'm a bit avoidant of conflict because it makes me uncomfortable. But I remind myself, and I think experience, and this is really only the last couple of years, experience has shown me that I feel so much better after I have these conversations when I speak my truth, when I instigate the conversation that's difficult or that I'm putting off. I feel so much better once I've done it.
Well, yeah, because it's having an honest conversation, right? And that is what makes people more connected. It makes you feel more heard. So it's going to help you feel better. I think it just probably the times that I can think of when this might happen in a workplace would be, like I said before, if you're giving feedback to somebody, that can feel
giving,
really
receiving.
If you're receiving feedback and having to negotiate that feedback, like if you don't agree with it, or if you do agree with it but you're not sure how to take that, that can be seen as quite a difficult conversation to have. If you have to advocate for yourself, that might feel like a difficult conversation to have. If you feel like someone has misread you or misinterpreted you, or somebody has is continuously doing something in the workplace that is halting your flow of work. We're not talking about anything super serious, but halting your flow of work, or the way you like to work, or the way that someone is behaving around you, or even keeping someone accountable in your team, that can be really difficult. Maybe like having conversations around money, which we've done an episode about that, contracts and cash. That's a lot of negotiation. It might look like about your role. So if you have to negotiate what your role will be for next year, what responsibilities you're taking on. There's some of the conversations where people might feel it is a critical conversation and require negotiation skills. Anything else, Lizzie? I'm sure there's like lots of examples.
I'm just thinking of signs within myself when I know I have to have a conversation about something, and it's usually like I can feel physically when I need to talk about something, and I can think about it at home, and one of those is around parenting. If something's happening and I feel like we're not on the same page, Pete and I are not on the same page. It's interesting. I feel like I work differently at home than I do at work in terms of how I have these conversations, which is really interesting. I'm kind of just reflecting in the moment, but I think I feel something within myself when, quite often that will come out in a behavior, and whether that's that I'm anxious and I start doing things at work, or I am reactive and I start saying things at home, or start to feel like tight in my chest. So I think being aware of, where you feel things and let your body be a guide to when maybe you need to have a conversation about things.
Because it will look different for everybody. And I think as you're growing, one conversation that might be really important for somebody is not as important for another person because you have different perspectives. So yeah, that's
totally
a really good point. Yeah. I think the key here, what we want to talk about is, I guess for better word is dialogue. Because dialogue is a two-way conversation, and that is also like negotiation. Negotiation is two ways. And so for most of us, we get used to having a one-sided conversation, or like being on the receiving end of a one-sided conversation. And so that is, I guess, initially where it's good to just think about that for yourself, your mindset. Are you realizing that conversations are two-way and that dialogue is two-way? And if someone is initiating, or if you're having a conversation with someone, either way, that it's, thinking back potentially on situations that people both are allowed to share their opinions, and those opinions are not what forms the decisions, but it's just having a dialogue, and it's just being able to share your opinion and have that two-way conversation. So I think that's the very start often, and that's the very start of negotiation. Often people think, I don't have a say, or I won't say anything, or I feel powerless because I haven't said anything. And it's just, I don't know what the reason for that would be, but it's just examining and knowing in your head that we're walking into any conversation, it is a two-way street.
Totally. And I'm thinking about it in terms, like I'm trying to think about it from like lots of different conversations that I would have. And one that I've struggled with this year is with commercial real estate. I've had a bit of I wouldn't say messy.
I don't think anyone enjoys dealing with real estate agents.
It has not been amazing. So, but I think one of the key points, and my brother is really good at coaching me through these, I guess they're negotiations, but it's the same concept, isn't it? And it's about thinking about what you want to get out of the conversation or the negotiation or whatever you're talking about, and what the other person wants, and then thinking about how you can, what are you willing to give to get somewhere, to get closer? How can we get closer to what we both want? And I think that's relevant in a critical conversation as it is in a negotiation, because it's all the same thing, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a backwards and forwards negotiation, trying to figure out what's the best outcome.
So yeah, I think we need to look at it from both perspectives, what each person is wanting to get out of it before we go into the conversation. I think preparing for a conversation. So one, we recognize how we're feeling. We recognize there's a need to have a conversation. And I think, like you say, it's about dialogue and opening the dialogue, because I think that is, and I guess recognizing that it's positive to have a dialogue, and and you will feel better once you have that dialogue, and then preparing yourself for the conversation so that you're going into it with a balanced mindset that is
considerate, open.
Yeah, and unemotional maybe.
Well, I think it would be emotional because you'll be knowing it's a crucial conversation.
Yeah.
But I think the questions are like, it's actually trying to, instead of having all that stress in your body, you obviously have that stress because it's anticipation. Yeah. So for me, I find that if I actually ask myself those questions, so what do I really want for myself? What do I really want for others? And I think then the next step is, what do I really want for this relationship?
Yes.
Because often we feel like that in the dialogue that we will then wreck the relationship. And that's like why we spoke about conflict before, because people think conflict is screaming at each other, yelling, and ruining the relationship. But this dialogue is actually not. But what do I really want for this relationship? I want to be friends on the other side. I want to have a good co-working relationship. I want to have a respectful relationship, a connected relationship. That will help you keep a bit balanced. And I find that when I do that, a little bit of that anticipation stress leaves my body, because I am not just thinking about myself. I'm thinking about the other party, and I'm thinking about the relationship. And then I think the last question is, well, how will I behave, or how would I behave if I really wanted these results, which is the results for myself, the result for the other person, and the result for the relationship. And that's the thing a lot of people fail to realize, is that you have to want something for the other person. You can't go into a negotiation or a dialogue or a conversation or a friendship with anyone wanting something for yourself and expecting it to work out and expecting it to be okay and a good, healthy relationship. So it can be really scary to think about the other person's perspective. But once you start doing it, you realize it's actually not that scary. You just got to open yourself up to a different frame of view and a different way of looking at things.
Yeah, and I think I just think there's so much power in understanding somebody else's perspective, because I think that when we're guessing or assuming how someone might be feeling and emotionally reacting to that, it can be quite harmful to ourselves and to the relationship. I absolutely love, I wrote this down. What do we want for the relationship? And then how would I behave if I really wanted these results? I think that is so powerful.
Because you would be like, oh, okay, well, I'm not going to get angry at you. I'm not going to say something unkind to you that I'm going to regret later on. And like, that's really being so proactive, isn't it? And it's actually taking away the emotions from it, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, it's taking, I think, it is emotional. What you're saying is emotional, but it's not reactive. So it's not like an emotional reaction. It's emotional preparation.
And you know what that is? We're in the logic side of our brain. So we're not in the right side of our brain. The right side of the brain is not time bound. It's not goal bound. It's emotionally driven and emotional bound. The left side of our brain is logic bound. So so often what can happen is when we get in a stressful state, we go into the right side of the brain where we can't think logically, and we're very emotional and we're very upset. And then we can't then logically bring ourselves back over to negotiate. So by doing this, I actually think it helps you stay in that left side. And
how do you reset if you're in a conversation and you go over to that? I think that takes practice. It's like, and like internally, like, no, I'm going back to that.
Well, what it is, it's refocusing your brain, right? So, and I always have to constantly do this in my marriage. Not so much at work, because I think at work you stay in your logical brain a lot easier.
Yeah, agreed.
Easier to go on your right side. So I have to refocus my brain. And I mean, I'm a visual person, so I picture my brain in my head, like right side, left side. I'm like, I've gone over to the right side, which is having self-awareness. I've worked on myself first. But it says in research that when we present our brain with demanding question or this negotiation, our body sends blood to the parts of our brain that help us think, to take fight or flight. And so what we want to do is we actually, to keep our brain focused, we need to ask questions about what we really want. And those 4 questions about what we really want to remind us of our goal, to remind us to be proactive with the end goal. And then this helps our brain stay focused on why we're doing what we're doing, which is getting us back into the logical side. And helping, like when we ask questions, that helps us then calm down.
And it's so interesting, isn't it? Like, I don't know if other people feel like this, but in general, asking questions is kind of has a bit of a negative, I don't know, vibe.
Because I feel like when you ask questions, people think you're questioning them, or you're questioning my ability.
Yes.
I'm speaking from personal experience that I've had to learn through this, and I've also had to speak to my team and correct my leadership team on this at different times, is when I'm asking questions, I'm not asking questions to try and trip you up, to test you. I'm not asking questions because I think you're incompetent. I'm not asking questions because
I don't trust you.
I'm asking questions actually genuinely because I don't know.
Yes.
Or because research has shown that when we ask questions, it brings us back into the left side to diffuse a situation, to take away any defensiveness, and return back to dialogue and to negotiation and conversation.
And it kind of, I feel like when you ask questions, I don't know the exact process of this, but I'm just like thinking through, when you're asking questions, it's not about you, it's about the relationships. And it slows it down, and it's less of an attack and more of a collaboration in terms of the conversation, right?
Yeah. I mean, I've been on the other side as well, where I then get defensive and I think, why are you asking me that?
Yeah, totally. It's like when Pete asks me something, I'm like, why? What have I done wrong now? He's like, oh my God, I'm just asking you. I'm like,
and I think that's the way that we have grown up. That's the way we're shaped and molded and formed from our environment. We can change that. But I think someone once told me, like, if I'm getting offended, that's a word that people use a lot. I'm really offended that you did that. Or like, if you're offended, you'll become defensive. When you're offended, that means that you think too highly of yourself. Because if you didn't have that pride, you wouldn't be offended. And so I think it's having a posture of humility, which is hard to do, right? So often we have to be aware and go on, oh, hang on, I have responded in offense. Why have I responded in offense? It's because I actually thought better of myself here. Or
can I stop you? Because I feel like that is an option, right? Yes. Or because I'm just thinking from myself, it's almost like that, like if someone is questioning me, it's like they're like this deep fear inside of myself that I don't know enough and I'm not good enough, and I, like my insecurity. You are calling out what my deep, dark secrets of myself are. Does that come back to that imposter syndrome?
But it's like, well, you're not actually, like maybe, like, I don't know, like it's like, well, nobody has it all together. Like, nobody, it's always.
I take it as a criticism. Someone's questioning me, and then I take it as a criticism, and it's like, I'm not good enough. If I think about like what my little brain's saying, which frustrates me, because I'm like, every day, I am good enough, I am good enough, I am good enough. Exhausting.
I think
I'm exhausted.
It's the person that is also questioning you, what they mean to you. So if someone came along and questioned you and you don't know them, they're not going to have as big an effect. Whereas if it's your spouse or your partner, that's going to have
your parents
effect. Yeah. Or it could be your boss. That's going to be a way bigger effect than, I don't know, a peer. What they think. So I think it's also knowing that. But, I think it comes back to, well, like, it's not about me. If you're getting offended, again, I think this is where then you have to go, there's two sides. What is this other person? The question we ask, what are they wanting? What are they wanting? It's really hard to do that in the moment.
Really hard to do in the moment.
Often it's, you do it in your reflection reactively in hindsight, because you're like, that did not go well.
Yeah.
But I think, the more that we talk about it, the more that we learn about it and we learn about ourselves, these conversations, they can get better. And I have seen that, because I was terrible with conversations when I started the business. And I wouldn't say I'm amazing now, but what I have learned is to be a little bit more self-aware in circumstances, which I have seen help.
Yeah, and I think something I am practicing is to be honest, I suck at this in my marriage. Hopefully Pete doesn't listen to the podcast, but I kind of taking responsibility for your part in whatever is going on. I feel like I am probably better at this at work than I am at home. But just saying, okay, what is my part in this, whatever situation it is, or whatever the conversation is, and because you can only control ourselves and our own reactions, and what could I do differently? So if we're going into a conversation with, one, that relationship and what you're wanting for that relationship, but then it's like, okay, what is my part in this, and taking some responsibility, because I think that is disarming in terms of emotional reactions.
And to take responsibility, obviously you need to reflect. So go and reflecting on your behavior, reflecting on your feelings. You need to, so behind our behavior and our feelings, there is always some type of conclusion that we've formed, or a story that is making us that we have told ourselves. And you just said that, the story that you've told yourself is oh, I'm not good enough. You're trying to counteract that, so that's good. But we always have a story there. We always have a story, but I think these things we never really get. We're always just a work in progress, right? But analyze your story, right? So then once you've analyzed your story, then you need to go back to the facts. And this is often the case with marriage or, interpersonal relationships, is you have to go, we have to distinguish what the hard facts are between the story, or what we've grown up with, or what we know, or why we're behaving and having the feelings that we are. So again, these can be positive things. It's not always negative. It's not always insecurity or fighting. It actually might be you're having a reaction which is super positive, but may not be called for in the circumstance. It's all a whole different myriad of emotions and stories. For me, I am over positive with everything. So sometimes that's also not helpful. But I think then we get back to the facts of what evidence do I have to support the story that is happening for you, and you kind of combat that for yourself. And then I need to come back to the path of dialogue, because you've just sort of done that reflection for yourself. And then when you're coming back to that dialogue, you probably would say this is my story, this is my emotions and my behavior. You ask for the other person's behavior and emotions and their path. I think the hard thing is if they're not in tune or in sync, that's really hard. But then you can explore with them potentially, and then try to have that dialogue. After you've had the dialogue, then you need to be clear on how you make decisions. The dialogue is not the decision making. That's just, and I think that's another big learning. This was for me, is that when I was dialoguing with an employee, my husband, whoever, someone I'm collaborating with, I thought the dialogue was the decision.
Yes.
The dialogue is not the decision. And if we remove that, then we just have the freedom just to speak and just converse.
Yes.
And then just really try to get all parties' perspectives on the table, really try to seek to understand the other person. And then once that has happened, then the decision-making is a separate thing by itself. And the decision-making comes through looking at everyone's opinions and trying to come up with that win-win solution, and trying to come up with, a consensus, whether that's, through consulting each other or whatever. But the dialogue is not the decision-making.
Yeah, that's so important, I think.
Yeah, because often, and that's why sometimes we don't feel like we should speak because we're like afraid to make a decision or we're really not sure yet. But if you think about it, we really need to dialogue to make the best decision. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think we need to sit and reflect on what is being said before we make the decision, because I think
Yeah.
if you're making the decision during the dialogue, you're either just dialoguing on your own. Is that actually a thing?
Well, you're not, I think it changes the conversation. You feel like you don't have freedom in the conversation to speak
Yeah.
because you
Well, you
just,
feel like it's not safe, and
yeah,
safety is I think, in any of these, difficult or challenging or critical or important or whatever you want to call it, conversations
yeah.
or negotiations. I think safety is the most important thing. And I
Mm.
think connection is the most important thing. So we need to have like the armor down. And I think to do that, it's that we're not necessarily coming up with a
Under pressure.
solution while we're getting our thoughts out. We're giving each other space
Yeah.
to, because like we're saying with like when you and I are voxering or when we're doing the podcast, it's cathartic talking about it. And obviously not everyone's going to be that way. And some people might need to go home and write it all down and understand it. So, and I don't know whether that's the best way to make decisions after these conversations, but I think you have the conversation, you get it all out, you maybe take some main points away from it, and then you have a bit of space to let
Mm.
it, I don't know, what's the word, digest,
Yeah.
or,
Yeah. I mean, that's what we do in our business from a practical point of view with our strategic meetings. So once a month, we have strategic meetings, and that's specifically the leadership team. And we set that time aside to just have an hour to talk. We normally have one item on the agenda. And so that might be, for example, bringing AI into the business. So it's a strategy, like it's a strategic thing. At the end of the whole point of the brainstorming, the discussion is to go, yes, we're going to pursue this or no. But what we do is we just have an hour and everybody speaks, lays out what they think, what they feel, the pros, the cons, the research they've done, but there is no pressure to make a decision in that hour.
Mhm.
We then let it sit, and then we will come back the week after and we'll go, has anyone else had any other thoughts?
Mm.
Then we'll say, then, like, if someone else comes with a thought, we then let it sit, or we'll then say, let's reconvene tomorrow and we'll make a decision on this. And so you have to have time and space to dialogue. And in that dialogue, I think, if you have overstepped, you would apologize and you would say, like, I'm really sorry that I, for X, Y, and Z did this. Don't apologize if it's not genuine, but, and then you can fix any misunderstandings as well in that. And that's just freedom of dialogue. And I think you need to have them. You can't have misunderstandings when you're trying to make decisions, because that's tricky as well. So that's when you have the space to do that, which creates stronger relationships.
I'm writing this down. I love it though. It's just, and I think, and you know what, you're talking about strategy, and I think that's the same sort of thing. You need to prepare, you need to think about the relationship or what the outcome of the strategy is. You need to create safety, you need to understand, you need to have freedom in dialogue, you need to have space before you're making a decision.
And I think another good practical thing you can do is that you basically say back, you paraphrase what that person's told you.
Yes, love that.
Understandings. You're saying X, Y, and Z. I'm saying X, Y, and Z. I will agree. I will do this before we meet again or talk again. You will do this. Is that right? Like, it's okay. Just, I think that's essential component of every meeting. At the end of every meeting, generally, that's, if I'm running the meeting, that's my role. I'll say, so these are what we're doing. If someone else is running the meeting, so I'll say, can you just run me through what are the action points for the meeting, what you're doing?
Yeah. That's so important, isn't it?
Yeah, because often at the end of the meeting,
it's saying your side and you're trying to decide, but there's no kind of boundaries around what you're doing. And then I think just the opportunity to misunderstand. So I think that like reflection at the end and just go clarification on the main points and the actionable items is really, really important. And the next steps kind of thing.
So the next steps would be you're deciding how you're going to decide. So
Yes.
you would say, okay, so we're going to sit on this, come back to it. Or is everyone happy that they've said their point? I might now go and take it and I'll make the decision, which can happen sometimes. Like I'll ask for your input as the head of the company. I'll go and make the decision now. Or do we want to do a vote? Or do we want to get a consensus? You want to decide how you're going to decide. And that depends on what you're trying to decide. Decide too many times.
Yeah.
I thought it might be good for people, just to take it back a little bit, for people who are starting to think about this concept and are starting to work on their own self-awareness of learning to look at yourself. It might be good to go through some, so I'm going to take this from the book Crucial Conversations, which we will reference and put the link at the end. They talk about like your style under stress. And I think this is something that really helped me to understand myself, but then also to help understand others. And I think you've used this as well, Lizzie, but help you understand others. And so then it helped me to stay focused in critical conversations. So I thought if it would be okay, we might just run through some of the things, the way that people are under stress, because we are different under stress to how we're not stressed. And I think it's good to be aware and sort of identify which one you would be, or you might be a few, and then start to work on that, which will only just help you in your workplace or in your relationships.
So how do we identify our habits?
Or I'll go through and talk about.
Yeah.
And then you can just kind of, I guess, know which one you are. It also is in the book, Crucial Conversations. So you can read that.
I need to reread.
I first read Crucial Conversations probably when I was like 2 or 3 years into business.
It was one of the first books I read.
Yeah, I'm still talking about it now. But conversations are, crucial, like he says. So often we might either have silence, or we might have, he says violence, but that's like a very strong word. And I think, it's probably just maybe a little bit of aggression or offensiveness. So silence means you're withholding from giving your opinion, and probably the violence that he says, it's trying to force your opinion in the negotiation. But he says basically there's kind of 3 types of the common forms of silence: masking, avoiding, and withdrawing. So masking consists of understating or selectively showing our true opinion. It might be like sarcasm or sugarcoating or couching as some of the more popular forms. So it's one of my pet peeves is when people say the truth, but they say it in sarcasm. They'll be like, they think they're joking. They're joking when they say it. It's all lighthearted, but it's actually like how they really feel. That's one form that people might respond in a stressful situation. Another way is avoiding. So it involves steering completely away from sensitive subjects. We talk, but without addressing the real issues. So that is another form of silence, he says. And then the third way of silence is withdrawing, which means pulling out of a conversation altogether. So we either exit the conversation or exit the room. And so that's probably, like, for me, withdrawing is probably my thing that I would do in a stressful situation. And that's so this is when you're under stress. The other way that we could go is violence, which I think is more like aggression. And it basically consists of any verbal strategy that attempts to convince, control, or compel others to accept your point of view. So he's got 3 main ways that we can do this. So is controlling. So that consists of coercing others to your way of thinking. This may include cutting them off, overstating your facts, speaking in absolutes, changing subjects, or using it says directive questions to control the conversation. So that's something I'm also working on. The second one under stress is labeling. So it's putting a label on people or ideas so that they can be dismissed under a general stereotype or category. So, I mean, just an example of this might be, oh, well, that person, they're entitled, or that person has been diagnosed with PTSD. So that's, they're just labeling. So we're not going to listen to what they're saying. And the third way is attacking, which includes belittling and threatening. And often that's what we talked about with conflict. That's what people think conflict is. But none of these, so we just talked about 6 things. So we've got masking, avoiding, withdrawing, controlling, labeling, or attacking. None of these are healthy ways of responding, but I'm sure pretty much everyone listening can be like, I do that. I do one of those, or I do multiple of those. What about you, Lizzie?
I don't even know. So are these the ways that we react in stress?
Yes, in conversations,
So it has to be like we're going to do one of these. So it's masking, avoiding, labeling,
withdrawing. So it's not you on it. Of the goal is that we don't do them.
Yeah.
That's the goal. And so, well, before we know, like, this is our process of helping us have self-awareness. Like, when we're presented with a challenging situation, how do we respond? What's our style under stress? And, we want to look for these things, because it's only when you can identify it that then you can work on it. And it's not going to be, if you're doing any of these things, that's not going to be helping you in a negotiation in your workplace. If you're doing a little negotiation with your peer in terms of like trying to discuss something about a client, all the way up to having a massive conversation with your boss about your role or your pay or your salary, none of these things are going to help. So we want to make sure that we're not doing these things, and that we're more staying in a safe place where we can have mutual respect and do what we've talked about already in the podcast.
And I think it's important that to like remind yourself, particularly if you're doing these things, which I'm sure I like dance between a few of those, but I think it's important if we come back to what's the outcome we want, what's the outcome for the relationship. So if you just keep coming back to those, because if we're having a big emotional reaction and we're, I don't know, attacking or withdrawing or labeling or any of those things, is that moving us in the direction that we want to be going? And I feel like in instances where I might do some of these things, it's when I'm out of control because I'm having a reaction or emotional, or it's triggered me or whatever. And that's not the outcome I want for myself. So, but it's obviously so hard to do in the moment. And I think the important thing that we all need to realize is that it takes practice.
It does. And so that's what I mean. Like, normally it's in retrospect, in hindsight. So I will maybe withdraw. I will exit the conversation that I'm having with my husband. And then I go, oh, I've done it again. I have withdrawn. I need to go back. And I need to figure out if I've withdrawn because I can't cope and I just don't want to deal with something, or whether I'm too emotional. So whatever that is, because we're talking about it's when things are really important to us. So that's what we're saying. We do get emotions involved. And so then we have to go back, like in hindsight.
So interesting, isn't it?
The more that we can have awareness about what we're doing, when we're doing it, in context with who, we can then, return back to the dialogue, return back to asking those critical questions, try and refocus our brain by asking the questions, apologize, fix any misunderstandings, and then start to look at what's the story, what's the behavior, what are the facts. And the whole point of all of this is to be able to come to making a decision, a really healthy decision that's a win-win for both parties. And you really feel like you're not getting ripped off. You really feel like you have helped someone else and you've helped yourself. It doesn't always have to be like a lose for yourself. That you improve with your emotional intelligence. And so you can, as you master these things, you can have more and more higher level conversations and get involved with higher levels of negotiation and discussions on bigger matters. And so, that might be talking to people that you would view in a higher level position, having confidence walking into a room and advocating for your industry or yourself or whatever that is, whatever that looks like, there's always people in our mind that we think we need to have big conversations with them. So that's why we would do these things.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
awareness is the first step, right? I'm just sitting here going, right, I'm going to get my Crucial Conversations book out and reread it, because I don't know. And I think I do different things in different relationships.
You'd be different at work to how you are at home.
Yeah. And with friends and with parents, and
yeah.
It's all really different.
But this is the work on yourself, working on yourself.
That's right. And I think it just shows me the importance to like revisit things. Like it's not like that self-development component of our life is not a tick and flick. It's not I know how to do this now. It's kind of, and as you grow and face more things and work with more people or have a family, it all gets, it can resurface. I think constantly going back to these things is really important, and being open to learn about yourself, because the self-awareness is the number one.
You start with heart, which is your self-awareness.
Yeah, I'm excited to reread it.
Yeah, so we'd highly recommend you reading it, or you can get summaries online. We hope that this conversation has equipped you with some skills to have some critical conversations in your workplace if that's needing to be happen, or just to be aware of conversations that someone might have with you, and just to really thrive, not just survive, in your workplaces and in your relationships. So again, we would love to hear what you think. Follow us on Instagram, send us any questions that you have, and until our next episode, start being self-aware and start focusing on your conversations.